In the frosty expanses of the battlefield in January 2026, where the winds of war howl like a hungry predator, the Russian army experienced a catastrophic humiliation that exposed its alleged superiority and shocked the world. More than a dozen armored vehicles, including heavy T-72 tanks and BMP infantry fighting vehicles, those rusty relics from the Soviet era, were disabled or transformed into blazing infernos in just minutes. The Russian mechanized strike force, pushing arrogantly through open terrain, came to an abrupt halt, hemmed into a death trap with no way forward or back. Imagine, dear listeners, the panic in the cramped cabins, Russian soldiers who believed themselves invincible now helpless as rats in a trap, while Ukrainian drones descended from the sky like avenging angels. It was no coincidence. No, it was a brutal warning. The method once considered the standard of modern warfare, the blind thrust with tank power, is now exposed as a deadly weakness, especially for an army like Russia's, which is drowning in corruption and obsolescence. The Ukrainians, with their ingenious mix of technology and courage, have humiliated the Russians, turned their tanks into scrap metal, and shown the world how weak the bear truly is when its claws are clipped. This battle was no ordinary setback on the battlefield. It was a manifesto of the hatred that blazes between the two sides like an unquenchable fire. Russian forces, driven by imperial greed and Putin's insane ambitions, stormed through open terrain with a large mechanized column, betting on speed and dense smoke clouds to camouflage their movements and break through Ukrainian defensive lines. Imagine the arrogance, dozens of tanks, each armed with 125mm cannons, thundering through the steppe, supported by BMPs carrying up to 7 infantrymen, a column of over 20 vehicles crawling forward like a steel snake. Yet, from the very first moments, Ukrainian drones, those cheap but deadly eyes in the sky, hovered above them, watching every formation, every movement. When the lead vehicles were hit and the rear section blocked, the entire column lost its mobility. It was the beginning of a massacre that exposed Russian incompetence. Their generals, blind to the realities of drone warfare, sent their men to their deaths, while the Ukrainians struck with surgical precision. Ukraine did not employ a single weapon, but a layered combat system, surveillance drones with HD cameras and ranges of up to 10 kilometers, FPV attack drones with explosive charges of 1 to 2 kilograms, precise artillery with 155mm shells, and ground troops that were seamlessly coordinated. This layering left no room for escape, a perfect storm of hatred that portrayed the Russian invaders as cowards and failures. Here, a decisive question arises that touches upon the future of war. How could an army protected by smoke armor and modern equipment collapse so quickly once it was detected? And above all, what does this pattern say about the future of large-scale mechanized warfare in an era where the sky is always watching? The Russian offensive began with false self-confidence, yet it stumbled into a battlefield where exposure was more important than tank steel. The column moved in close formation through open terrain at speeds of up to 40 kilometers per hour, relying on dense smoke screens from phosphorus shells that reduced visibility to under 50 meters. The goal: to cross the open terrain, quickly maintain momentum, and reach the next line before the defenders could react. But what the Russian crews did not see, and how typical of their outdated tactics, was that Ukrainian FPV drones were already in the air beforehand, waiting until the column was fully committed. These drones, with battery lives of 30 to 45 minutes and speeds of over 100 kilometers per hour, followed quietly, marking the rhythm of the advance, watching as the vehicles aligned themselves on the route. This early tracking tipped the balance before the first blow fell. Timing and position were known, and the Russians walked blindly into the trap. The first hits came against the lead vehicles. An FPV drone dove deep with a precision of centimeters and struck the front of the column, stopping the lead vehicle, a T-80 tank weighing 45 tons with 1,250 horsepower, which dictated the direction and pace. Seconds later, another drone hit the rear, sealing the exit and trapping the rest in between. Now the fight was no longer a breakthrough, but a hunt. Every vehicle had to choose a path, while the Ukrainians turned that path into a kill zone. Turning around was impossible. Pushing forward was blocked, and spreading out only increased exposure. A perfect humiliation for the Russian army, which boasts of being the second army in the world but acted like amateurs here. Engines chugged at idle, smoke drifted unevenly, and the formation that relied on speed suddenly stood still in the open. This pause was no minor delay, it was the beginning of the end. The crews inside the vehicles, often poorly trained recruits from remote regions of Russia, felt their options shrinking second by second. The FPV drones did not rush in immediately to destroy the column. Instead, they hovered, repositioned themselves, and kept the pressure constant while the formation floundered. Every visible adjustment by the drivers and commanders revealed more about the situation on the ground. Some vehicles tried to advance under smoke cover, but the smoke no longer matched their movement, a classic error of Russian tactics that rely on quantity over quality. Others remained stationary, hoping for a reset of the situation. But nothing changed. The surveillance from above remained clear enough to control the scene. What mattered here was not destruction, but control. The drones had forced the column into a fixed position where the initiative passed entirely to the defenders. Every decision was now a reaction to a threat instead of shaping the fight. Inside the vehicles, the crews understood the danger. Hatches remained closed. Radios overflowed with brief updates, and distances that once seemed safe now felt cramped and exposed. The formation could still fire, but firing without movement offered little relief. While the armored line was shaken, Russian infantrymen advanced in the trenches, waiting for reinforcements, a desperate attempt to maintain pressure even as the steel fist fell apart. It was a picture of hatred. The Ukrainians, driven by years of suffering under Russian aggression, humiliated the invaders by using their technology to break Russian arrogance. Sensational reports from within the Russian army speak of desertions and mutinies as soldiers realize their leaders are sacrificing them as cannon fodder while Putin celebrates in his palace. Once the column was stuck, it became a static problem that could be solved step by step. This is the risk for large mechanized thrusts in a sky full of cheap, persistent drones, especially for an army like Russia's, which fights with outdated systems and where corruption sabotages its equipment. What happened next began not with explosions, but with silence. This silence marked the end of the advance as an offensive action and the beginning of a defensive struggle in the open. As soon as the column was forced to stop, the battle shifted from movement to exploitation. Here, Ukrainian fire coordination took full control. Reconnaissance drones that had tracked the advance now focused on precision, relaying exact positions to artillery units already on standby with ranges of up to 30 kilometers and hit accuracies of under 10 meters. With close fire at the edges and indirect fire from depth, Russian units were under pressure from two directions simultaneously, which quickly restricted their options. Some vehicles tried to escape backward. Others tried to maneuver around wrecks, and the infantry in the trenches was left pushing forward while waiting for the armor to recover, a chaotic mess that underscored Russian incompetence. Explosions landed close enough to shake crews in their holes even when direct hits were avoided. Shrapnel tore into exposed parts, damaged optics, and cut through external systems, further reducing awareness and coordination. Smoke, which once served as cover, mixed with dust from impacts, creating confusion without restoring protection. While artillery fire held the column in place, FPV drones moved forward to exploit specific weaknesses. These drones did not attack from random directions. Their operators aimed at areas that mattered most once vehicles were immobilized. In the footage, the image shifts from a single damaged lead tank to a broader advance with multiple vehicles and a supporting fire plan designed to shatter trenches and clear paths. This is the classic response when momentum is lost. Commanders often believe the fastest solution is to add more steel and more shells to overwhelm the defenders before they can regroup. In several instances, drones slipped into these gaps and detonated inside, turning the vehicle itself into a source of damage. The most destructive moments came when drones reached ammunition stores. Once penetrated, the initial charge did not explode alone. Stored ammunition ignited pressure built up in a flash, and secondary detonations tore through the interior. Turrets lifted off panels burst outward, and nearby vehicles were showered with fragments. These chain reactions changed the battlefield within minutes, a spectacle of horror that drove up Russian losses and broke their morale. A single FP5 hit no longer affected just one vehicle. Burning wrecks blocked movement, spread fire, and forced nearby crews to abandon their machines. Inside the column, chaos grew. Crews faced the hard choice of staying in armored shells under rising heat or fleeing into the open, still watched from above. Some vehicles tried to fire back, but firing without movement only revealed positions more clearly to observers in the sky. A mine hit does not just damage the vehicle struck, it throws fragments, dust, and shock into the path of nearby crews and forces the rest to brake hard or change course. The rhythm of the fire reflected control, not haste. Every strike was placed to maintain pressure rather than to hurry destruction. Ukrainian artillery continued to fire to keep the tempo low. The goal was not just destruction, but immobilization and the prevention of escape. Every shell and every drone attack built on the last shrinking options for the trapped formation. The occurrence of repeated secondary explosions carried a psychological burden. Crews watching neighboring vehicles explode understood what that meant for their survival. Self-confidence vanished quickly once it became clear that armor offered no guarantee once mobility was gone. The damage spread faster than any single weapon alone could achieve. By the end of this phase, the column was no longer a fighting force marching toward an objective. It was a pile of disabled vehicles, burning wrecks, and exposed crews reacting under constant observation. The fight continued, but its direction was no longer in doubt. What followed built directly on this collapse as deeper strikes and broader effects beyond the immediate battlefield took hold. The battle expanded beyond the trapped column once Russian air defenses were lured into the open, a critical shift that further exposed Russian weakness. While armored vehicles burned on the ground, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones began scanning deeper, searching for systems intended to protect the area from aerial attacks. Hidden air defense units depend on silence and lack of motion to survive. As long as radars remain dark and launchers immobile, they are difficult to locate in cluttered terrain. Ukrainian scouts discovered signs of a Russian air defense system. Repositioning the change did not have to be dramatic, as even limited movement altered patterns that had remained static. In other cases, brief radar activities or command transmissions created signals that stood out from the background. From that point on, the position was no longer hidden. Coordinates were refined through aerial observation, and confirmation followed in minutes. The system that protected the rear of the battlefield became the target instead of the shield, a sensational turn that shows how Russian technology, despite billions in investment, fails because corruption eats away at maintenance. The response came from a distance. HIMARS units received the location and prepared to strike with guided missiles designed for precision rather than saturation, each missile with a range of 70 kilometers and a hit accuracy of under 5 meters. There was no need for repeated fire, as accuracy mattered more than volume in this phase. A Bradley is useful in this role as it can transport troops and fire simultaneously. It acts as a shield for movement while exerting pressure on exposed positions. When the smoke cleared, the system protecting Russian forces from aerial threats was gone, a loss with consequences far beyond the destruction of a vehicle. Nonetheless, the armor is described as resilient, and the detail matters because it keeps the Bradley in the fight long enough to fulfill its mission: suppression and support of the trench line. This moment shows how both sides think Russia tries to cut off the vehicle protecting Ukrainian infantry movement while Ukraine prevents the infantry line from being overwhelmed by numbers. The sky became less contested, and this advantage flowed directly back into ground operations for Russian units still fighting near the stalled column. This shift was deeply felt. FPV drones began a real hunt for Russian tanks, and the key is that these drones do not wait until the column stops on its own. Without reliable air defense protection, attempts to reorganize or move equipment became more dangerous. Every movement risked immediate detection, while standing still invited sustained pressure from drones and artillery. The significance of this moment lies in its timing. The air defense system was not destroyed at the start of the engagement, but at a point where Russian forces were already under strain. Once the shield was gone, the remaining forces operated under constant exposure. This phase did not end the battle alone, but it reshaped the environment in which the rest of the fight took place. With fewer threats in the air, Ukrainian drones could push harder and stay longer. The ground beneath reflected this change as pressure increased and options shrank. By removing a key defensive layer, the engagement crossed a threshold. What followed built on this advantage as coordinated ground troops pushed forward to exploit the opening created by precision fire from afar. The ground battle shifted to a coordinated attack as soon as Ukrainian tank units advanced to exploit the gap from above. With Russian formations already disrupted, Leopard 2 tanks with their 120mm smoothbore cannons and armor that makes Russian shells bounce off, took up positions along covered routes and tree lines, waiting for movements that revealed targets. The ambush unfolded quickly. A Russian vehicle at the front of a small formation rolled forward and hit a mine, stopping instantly and blocking the narrow path behind it. Seconds later, another armored vehicle tried to maneuver around the disabled wreck, but a Leopard shell hit it directly, turning it into a burning obstacle. This sequence broke cohesion immediately, another humiliation for the Russians whose tactics could have originated from World War II. Armored personnel carriers behind the lead vehicles stopped in confusion, and infantry dismounted under pressure. Without clear direction or cover, soldiers abandoned their vehicles and scattered, leaving equipment in the open. Leopard crews did not storm the area. They maintained distance and switched ammunition from anti-tank shells to high-explosive rounds as resistance thinned. These shells targeted enemy-occupied buildings and field positions near the contact line. Every impact tore open walls and roofs, causing strong points to collapse that infantry alone could not safely clear. After each shot, the tanks slightly adjusted their positions. This movement reduced the risk of counterfire and made it harder for surviving Russian elements to fix their location. The advance remained controlled rather than fast, every action designed to limit exposure. In another sector of the battlefield, a similar pattern unfolded with different equipment. A Ukrainian Abrams with 1,500 horsepower and armor that spits at Russian missiles received coordinates for a multi-story building where Russian forces had taken cover. The tank halted, stabilized its cannon, and fired a single round that slammed into the building. A second shot followed, and the structure partially collapsed, removing the position as a defensive anchor. Once the building was neutralized, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles advanced. They approached under cover, using their 25mm cannons to suppress windows, doors, and nearby positions. This fire kept remaining defenders pinned down, while infantry closed the distance. But the twist: the HIMARS are described as decoys, and the source emphasizes that the difference is hard to tell from a distance. An expensive strike ends up buying noise and smoke instead of real losses. Unmanned aerial vehicles remained overhead during this phase, scanning for movement, confirming hits, and warning of attempts to regroup or counterstrike. When new targets appeared, information flowed back to ground crews in real time. This integration changed the rhythm of the fight. Russian units could not rely on isolated positions or short breaks to recover. Every attempt to move forces was observed. Every delay increased the risk of another strike. This approach reduced unnecessary exposure and preserved momentum. Instead of pushing deep into unknown territory, Ukrainian units cleared methodically, turning local success into stable control. The ground fight became an extension of the earlier aerial advantage rather than a separate contest. By this stage, Russian resistance had shifted from organized defense to scattered survival. Abandoned vehicles became hazards instead of assets, and positions that once offered cover became traps once identified. The final phase of the engagement revealed a complete multi-layered trap where every action fed the next and left the attacking force with no safe exit. What unfolded was not a single blow, but a sequence that began long before contact and ended with the collapse of structure and morale. The process started quietly with signals collection. Radio traffic, short transmissions, and movement patterns provided clues to unit positions and intentions. Once this information was gathered, drones moved in to confirm suspicions, fixing positions and tracking changes as they happened. With targets identified, FPV drones and precision fire took over. These strikes did not aim to destroy everything at once. The goal was control rather than speed. Every hit forced a reaction, and every reaction revealed new weaknesses that could be exploited from above. This is why the battlefield looks like a managed trap. Targets are not just hit. They are tracked, fixed, and finished off when they stop or are forced into narrow lanes. Drivers who tried to turn back or take detours found themselves under fire again with no clear direction offering safety. As pressure built, the battlefield narrowed. Burning wrecks blocked roads, damaged warehouses, restricted space, and smoke marked every failed attempt to move. The formation was no longer a coordinated force, but a series of isolated groups reacting under stress. Ukraine, on the other hand, is tested on endurance. UAV spotting, artillery timing, and FPV hunting teams must remain coordinated to keep the kill chain alive. The effect of this system went far beyond equipment losses once tempo was lost. Decisions became slower and less coherent. Orders came late or contradicted what crews saw, and trust in the command structure vanished. Command disruption followed naturally, with leaders struggling to understand the situation. Units acted on partial information or waited for guidance that never came. This hesitation created gaps that grew with every minute, making recovery impossible. Morale suffered alongside structure. Watching neighboring vehicles destroyed without warning changed how soldiers assessed their chances of survival. The feeling of being constantly watched removed the sense of control that armored units rely on. Even if firepower remained available, it could not be used effectively. Weapons meant for offensive movement became liabilities once pinned down. What began as an advance became a series of defensive reactions without a clear goal. Once a formation is lured into a layered trap, escape becomes unlikely. Every step is watched, every pause punished, and every regrouping attempt creates new exposure. The system is not based on overwhelming force, but on linking simple tools into a continuous pressure cycle. The collapse seen here followed this logic from beginning to end. No single moment decided the battle, but together, these stages removed all remaining options. This pattern explains why modern mechanized attacks fail when facing a defender who controls the sky and information flow. Without free movement and clear thinking, even well-equipped units lose their advantage, especially one like Russia's, which is drowning in scandals such as stolen rations and defective tanks. What remains is a lesson written in scorched vehicles and abandoned positions, showing how layered warfare now defines success or failure on the battlefield. What happened on this battlefield points to an unmistakable shift that can no longer be ignored. Modern mechanized war is no longer decided by who brings more vehicles forward, but by who controls information tempo and the sequence of pressure. The Russian advance did not fail because armor suddenly became useless. It failed because movement was exposed and every pause was punished by a linked chain of drones and ground troops. Once this chain snapped shut, recovery became impossible. Ukraine has shown that relatively cheap tools like UAVs and FPV drones can deliver effects far beyond their price when used as part of a system. When surveillance, target acquisition, fire support, and cleanup work together, even large armored formations designed for old wars can be incrementally stopped and dismantled. This lesson reaches far beyond one sector of the front. Military planners worldwide are now watching closely because the question is no longer theoretical. Can traditional mechanized doctrines adapt quickly enough to operate under constant observation and rapid precision strikes? Or is this the moment where large-scale tank thrusts carry risks that outweigh their benefits in many modern battlefields? The answer is forming in real time. Some forces will adapt tactics and technology, others will try to protect movement, and some will struggle with long-held assumptions. What happens next depends on who learns the fastest and who refuses to change. The battlefield writes this answer every day. Imagine, dear listeners, if you were a Russian commander in this inferno, would you A. continue to push forward and sacrifice your men, or B. order a retreat and admit the humiliation? Share your thoughts in the comments. And in the end, was the Ukrainian tactic a stroke of genius that finally unmasked the Russian army, or just a temporary victory? Let us know. Your analysis matters. If such clear and well-founded analyses matter to you, like, share with others, and subscribe to Military Force for more reports on modern war, real battles, and the political forces that shape them. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more shocks from the war.